The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you.
Jesus said to his disciples, "I have come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it was already blazing. There is a baptism with which I must be baptized, and how great is my anguish until it's accomplished. Do you think I have come to establish peace on earth? No, I tell you, rather division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2, 2 against 3. A father will be divided against his son, and a son against his father, a mother against her daughter, and a daughter against her mother, and a mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." The Gospel of the Lord.
Well, dear friends, does God want peace? That's a question we can wrestle with a little bit this morning, because if we listen to our gospel, we heard some surprising things. Jesus says, "Do you think that I have come to establish peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division." And he goes on from there to say that father will be divided against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. And we know that, sometimes in-laws are never the easiest, right? But does God want peace? We know in other places in the scriptures, Jesus himself is called the Prince of Peace. We also know that St. Paul says that Jesus is the fullness of God who makes peace by the blood of his cross. And Jesus even prayed at the Last Supper for his disciples, saying that they may all be one. In other words, without division, without conflict between them, that they may be one, as you, Father, are in me and I in you. So which is it? Well, it's both, of course. There's always a nuance. When I studied at the Dominican House of Studies back in Washington, D.C., Dominicans are famous for making distinctions. And they would say, seldom affirm, never deny, always make distinctions. That's the Dominican way. And so we have to say, in one sense, yes, Jesus wants peace for us all. He wants us to be in peace. But in another sense, we can say, well, we have to nuance that, right? Because what happens as we follow the Lord, as we ourselves grow in peace, as we come to know the Lord, as we choose him over the ways of the world, over sin and darkness, well, then what happens is that then we find ourselves bumping into and being attacked by the forces of evil that want to lead us astray, that want to get us away from God. And that's where the lack of peace enters in. It's the forces of darkness that try to attack us because we're doing something good, because we're choosing God. I have a friend who is in the OCIA program in another state, and he's getting closer and closer to coming into full communion in the church. He was baptized in another denomination, but then is seeking a full admission into the Catholic faith. And as he gets closer and closer, the attacks increase. Do you know that? Does that sound familiar? Anytime we do something big for God, the attacks are there. And so the other night, he had such a horrible night, feeling like he was being attacked by demons. He couldn't even tell if he was dreaming it or if it was happening in reality. He said that he had that in this dream experience or whatever, it was such a powerful attack of the enemy, he had to get up out of bed, go to his truck where he knew he had his rosary, and he grabbed the rosary and wrapped it around his hand, and he wasn't sure if he was dreaming all of that or if it really happened. And then I asked him, well, when you woke up in the morning, did you have a rosary in your hand? And he said, I did. So it really happened. Well, we know then that what are we to do? Well, we have to keep fighting that source of evil. We have to keep fighting the enemies in our lives. And so St. Paul in the letter to the Hebrews, at least the letter to the Hebrews is traditionally ascribed to St. Paul. He says, "Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us rid ourselves of every burden and sin that clings to us and persevere in running the race, and while keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus." That's a wonderful recipe for how to keep going in the face of opposition. First of all, looking to our own selves, right? How are our souls? Do our souls need a little housekeeping, a little cleansing? Because the cleaner we make our own souls, going to confession especially, then the less chance the enemy is going to have a grip on us. When we find ourselves sliding into sins and doing things that we know we shouldn't be doing, the enemy can get a little better grip on us. So let's make ourselves very slippery to the enemy by making our souls squeaky clean. And then this idea of perseverance. Perseverance isn't easy. We can get discouraged. But if we know that Jesus himself persevered on the cross for us, and if we know that if we keep holding on to him and asking him for the power that we don't have, asking him to help us through these dark times, the Lord can help us to persevere. He can give us the grace. It's not our power, it's not our strength. He can do it. But if we can hold on, then we will see the victory. And that victory is what gives us hope. So that's why St. Paul then concludes, then keep our gaze focused on Christ. And a special powerful way to do that is to look at the crucifix, because there we see, when we think we have it bad, when we think we're under attack, look at Jesus, right? Look what he suffered. And that helps us to keep saying yes to the Lord. The letter to the Hebrews, which all this was in our second reading, we hear this too. Consider how he endured such opposition from sinners, in order that you may not grow weary and lose heart. So who did Jesus do it all for? Us, right? So when we're suffering persecution, attacks, criticisms, etc., who can we do it for? Maybe the very people who are attacking us. We can say, Lord, oh, this is painful, but I offer it for them. Touch their hearts, Lord, bring them to you. And we know that if we do this, we're in good company because we're with Jesus. Jesus said this in John's Gospel: if the world hates you, realize that it hated me first. So that's a wonderful word of encouragement. And in the diary of St. Faustina, Jesus says this to her: these difficulties, whatever obstacles we face, criticism, setbacks, etc., these difficulties that affect you so painfully are needed for your sanctification and are evidence that this work is mine. So if we're trying to follow the Lord, we're trying to live a moral life, we're trying to choose him, and we get opposed, we know it's for our sanctification, and it's proof that this is really his work. So instead of getting discouraged and say, well, I should just give up, we can say, no, this opposition, this attack of the enemy that I feel, this is proof that this is really from the Lord, and I'm going to persevere. We've all faced criticisms, attacks in our own lives, in our families even. What else can we do to keep warring against the enemy and persevere? Well, we have Venerable Patrick Peyton. Father Patrick Peyton was the promoter of the Family Rosary. Some of you have probably heard of him. And he loved encouraging families to pray the rosary together. In fact, his famous quote was, "The family that prays together stays together." And that's a wonderful encouragement, because when we experience division within our families, maybe some of us have children who aren't going to church, children who, maybe grandchildren then who aren't even baptized, it's so important to pray and to pray the rosary. And, what if the children aren't around or they don't want to pray? Well, are you still together with your spouse? At least the two of you can pray. It's so important to pray together. There's something very special about praying together, because that already is contrary to the enemy's strategy of dividing. So when you pray together, you're coming together and being of one heart and mind in prayer. And that's already a step contrary to the devil and his tactics. Maybe if the children aren't around, or they might not be normally inclined to pray the rosary with you, maybe you can lure them into it with a special occasion. Maybe you have a wedding anniversary or something like that, and you can say, well, sure, we'd love to go to dinner and celebrate our wedding anniversary, but how about if we also pray the rosary together? Wouldn't that be great? You can coax your children into joining you for the rosary that way. Well, another way that we can oppose the enemy and his tactics is through holy marriages. There are some alarming statistics that marriages are on the decline. And I saw a statistic that said that less than 50% of households in the U.S. today are headed by a married couple. Less than 50%. And so it's so important for us, especially if you're not yet married, to think about choosing holy matrimony and seeing your marriage as an intentional, countercultural witness in our world that Jesus comes first, and trying to live lives according to his guidance is the most important thing. And when we do that, we stay together. Spouses are promising to stay united instead of be divided. Now, I know very much, and we all know that there's many, maybe even be many of us here who have suffered through divorce or the divorce of your parents. And it's not easy. My heart goes out to you. But even as we acknowledge that pain and the brokenness and sin that leads to that, at the same time, we still look to the ideal. We still look to what God has instituted from the beginning and say, that's what I want to aim for. Whether it's in my own life, or that's what I want to pray for my parents, maybe that they can somehow reconcile. Whatever it is, we know nothing is beyond God's power. And so this can be part of our prayer for unity in the family, to be either restored or perhaps a new chance at unity, however the Lord might bring that about. Well, I, too, have experienced opposition and difficulties in my own family life. When I was entering the seminary, my parents were not on board with my vocation. And so there was tension there, and it wasn't an easy time. This is my dad. This was when he retired, so I don't know how long ago that was, 35 years ago probably, a long time ago. But when I was in the seminary, Dad wasn't so sure about my vocation, and he expressed that at times. And understandably, Dad had helped to put me through school, studying engineering. I had been working as an engineer for a while, making some decent money, etc. So it's understandable that Dad didn't understand, even though I wish he would have even back then. But God's grace was still at work. God was still working on my dad. And so there was a friend of mine, Archbishop Chaput from Denver, who helped encourage me in my vocation and helped me to learn how to discern my vocation. He said to me, because he knew the difficulties of my family, he said, the grace of your vocation will be at work in your parents, in your family. And it's true, because my dad eventually came around. How did that happen? Well, as I was getting close to ordination, my superiors were already thinking about having me become the novice master for the community, a teacher. And my dad, what was his career? Teaching. He was first a teacher and then a grammar school principal. And then my mom, too, was also a teacher. For 47 years, she taught the same grade, the same subject, in the same school. 47 years. Then retired, and then substitute taught. So there's something in the blood, I think. And so as I was getting close to ordination, and my superiors were saying they wanted me to become the novice master, I told that to my dad, and it was as if the light bulb suddenly went off. And he realized, you're going to be a teacher, which is not only like mom and dad, but my dad had gone to Catholic grammar school and then Catholic high school, and he went to a Jesuit college. And so he knew priests as teachers. And so once he realized that, and it all made sense to him, then he was fully on board with my vocation. He became one of my best fans, so to speak. He even, on my first Father's Day as a priest, after my ordination, my father sent me a Father's Day card. So God's grace definitely works. And if we're experiencing opposition, tensions, even in the family, our own families, never give up, never cease persevering, because we know that our witness to Jesus helps to win souls for Christ. At times it might feel like swimming upstream, but when we know that we're with Jesus, we're going in a good direction. And may our witness be the light that helps other people to have their hearts converted, touched by the Lord, and choose him as well. In this way, we too can say with Jesus that I wish this fire were blazing, a fire of love for the Lord, and may the Lord use us to help bring that fire here on earth.